was actually recruited by a fellow that was an x-ray technician that I had worked with at Hot Spring County Memorial Hospital. I didn't know that he was working for the Guard, had no idea, didn't know much about the Guard, other than there was an armory in the hometown and the Guard had been activated during the Central High School crisis. George Gatliff was my recruiter. He called me one day and asked me if I had ever considered joining the Guard, and told him no, hadn't even thought about it. He said, well, you'd be good at it. I'm going to send you some paperwork, fill it out, and bring it to me over here at Rick's Armory. So I did, I filled it out, and then George called me up and said they had frozen the induction process. They weren't accepting anybody. So I put the paperwork in a drawer and forgot all about it. Went on my merry way, and I guess it was close to 3 years later, I got another call from George, and he asked me if I still had that paperwork, and I said, well, somewhere around here I do. So I located it, and he had told me, he said, when you find it, you bring it to me. So I did, and in March of 1976, I was commissioned a first lieutenant. That was in March. In May, I went to my first annual training at Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Denver, Colorado. We were transported there on a C-130. Worst airplane ride I ever had in my life, I think. Remember, I'd only been in the Guard a few months. I didn't know how to salute. I didn't know anything. And we used to laugh when we'd come back from the hospital in the afternoon that one in our midst had stuck her thumb in her eye when she was trying to salute. I don't know if she really did or not, but anyway, we accused her of it. We still speak today. and coming home, we got out to get on the airplane, and the airplane had some broken part on it. I think we stayed in this hangar maybe 6 or 7 hours before we ever took off. And I vowed that day that I would never again go to annual training without my own transportation. I would get there some way, somehow, but I wasn't dependent on Uncle Sam to get me there and get me home. I even learned to drive all the trucks, the 5-ton, the big, wide Humvee ambulance, all of it. I learned to drive all of it because I told them they weren't going to put me in the desert and they all get killed and I wouldn't have a way out of there. So I learned. I went out to Camp Robinson after I'd get off work in the afternoon at 1 or 2 o'clock, and I learned to drive. Sergeant Jimmy Hastings taught me to drive all those vehicles. And somewhere I still have my driver's license. Anyway, my Guard time was quite productive. I went in as a first lieutenant. Always told everybody I was the oldest first lieutenant in the Army.
And how old were you?
39.
39.
1 year shy of not being able to get in. Most of the females at the time were in the nurse corps. There were very, very few female officers that were not nurses. I was allegedly elected, I don't know if I was elected or selected, to be the 148th ABAC representative on the National Guard Association Board of Directors. And that National Guard Association sort of intrigued me. It had a whole lot of money that was sitting there and nobody was watching it. And it bothered me that there were no full-time people there. And it just seemed that there was just a collection of people that just went through there fiddling with the money. And of course, I'd always had to watch my money, and I figured they needed to be watching their money. I was elected second vice president of the National Guard Association, then first vice president. And then I became the very first female in any National Guard association in the United States or any of its territories to become president of a National Guard association. So that was quite a feat. I was chief nurse of the 148th when it was deactivated. The Army decided that evacuation hospitals were no longer needed in the combat zone. They had special teams that moved around and still do have to this day. Starting out in the 148th, I was the head nurse in the operating room because I was the only one in there that had any operating room experience. The 148th was mobilized for Desert Storm. We were activated, I believe it was November 21st, 1990. And we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for training. Beautiful Fort Polk, often referred to as the armpit of the Army. And I didn't give it that name, somebody else did. I was the chief nurse of anesthesia, the chief nurse anesthetist when we were deployed. So it was my job to get the anesthesia department up and going. And we thought that when we unloaded all of this equipment that it would be, contained as anesthesia equipment, OR equipment. Not so. It was all mixed up. Even in the operating room, the instruments were packed individually in little brown envelopes. So we had, all the nurse anesthetists helped the operating room get stuff together, and the operating nurses, they helped us get stuff together. We finally found it all, and we were operational. We didn't make our deadline because when we got to Saudi, first of all, the airplane I was on landed at the wrong airport. We taxied around for several minutes, probably half an hour, before we ever found out which airport we were supposed to be in. So we took off again and we landed at the other airport. And then we were transported out to the famous Kobar Towers, which we dubbed the MGM Grand. It was a big high-rise, marble floors, no furnishings whatsoever. We slept on the floor for about 10 days before we were moved out to the desert. Here again, we had no transportation. There was no transportation. Our administrative people had no transportation. They finally got a bus that was their staff car. So they could go to the port and work with the people to find out where we were going to be located and all this. After about a 16-hour convoy, we got to our site. The advance party had found it, and they had kind of staked it out, and some sleep tents had been set up. We had I think a deadline of the 15th of January. Now, we had landed on New Year's Eve. We had begun setting everything up, and it started to rain. Well, when it rains in the desert, the sand turns to mud. Now, not your Delta gumbo mud. This was halfway up to your knees. Messy, messy, messy stuff. Oh, it was awful. In the midst of all that, we found out that we were the front line of this war effort. We had been put down in front of the 3rd Armored Division that was getting ready to move north to meet the Iraqis. And their bigwigs came over to talk to our bigwigs to say, y'all are in the way. So they moved us in the middle of the night back south to the 12th Evac Hospital, and we stayed there for, 3 or 4 days, and we were there when the bombing effort started. Now, we hadn't even begun to set up our hospital. We had over 1,000 outpatient visits we did 58 operations. Now, we were only operational 6-7 weeks. The war didn't last long, as you well remember. We had one death. We had, I think it was 280 some odd patients all together in this 7 weeks. The very first anesthetic I gave was to a young soldier from another unit. When he came in, they had cut his BDUs starting at the ankle all the way up through the crotch, so he didn't have any clothes to go back to his unit. Well, as everybody knows, the Arkansas Guard is pretty thrifty, creative, resourceful. I had the opportunity to visit a Saudi market where I purchased a sewing machine. It was manual, you turned it, the little handle like this. Anyway, I went to visit this young man one day. I said, "Why haven't you gone back to your unit?" He said, "I don't have any pants." I said, "Where are your pants?" And he said, "They're over here and they're cut all up." I said, "Give them to me, I'll sew them up." So I took them back to my sewing machine and I sewed up his pants, and I took him his pants, and he told me they fit a whole lot better than they did before. So before I went to the desert, we did medical readiness training exercises in Central and South America where we treated the underserved population in these countries. And we'd always come home wondering why we couldn't do this at home. Why can't we do this at home? So when we came back in 92, I think it was 94, we did a medical readiness training exercise in Earl, Arkansas. So that was sort of the beginning of thinking about things to do for our community. And I had read several things about stand-downs that had been done for Vietnam veterans. And I kept saying to our commander, "We need to do this, we need to do this." And he wouldn't listen to me, so I started saying it to the adjutant general. And they had a special projects officer up on the hill. And he suggested that I go talk to this special projects officer, which I did. He thought it was a good idea. So he said, "We'll just have to get funding, and how we do that, we'll have to go to Washington to get funding." I saw the Honorable Debbie Lee, and she thought it was a good idea, so she said, "Yes, we'll fund it."
What was her position at that time?
She was the Undersecretary for Guard and Reserve Affairs. Folks would tell me it couldn't be done. Don't tell me it can't be done, because it can. It can be done. You just have to make up your mind it can be done, and it was. We had total support from our nursing service. Can't say so much for some other service, but anyway, it was we had doctors from Baptist that came. It was just a really, really, really great experience. I would say, other than going to Desert Storm, that was the highlight of my Guard career. It was a very, very fulfilling feeling, I guess, a thing of accomplishment. And I don't think it's ever been done since, anywhere in the state.